Discover prototypical track and turnouts with the Roadmaster series from Oak Hill Model Railroad Track Supply. Proudly made in the United States, Oak Hill's handcrafted turnouts provide unparalleled detail and accuracy, giving your layout museum-quality track work at an affordable price. Whether fully built or in easy-to-assemble kit form, Roadmaster provides all the details of real track. Looking for a custom piece of track work? Oak Hill can help with custom turnouts, diamonds, crossings, and more. Check out all of their offerings on their website, ohrtracksupply.com. If you own a Proto Throttle, it's time to upgrade your fascia with TullyModels.com fascia Proto Throttle holders. Experience safe, one-handed operation of your Proto Throttle and easily shift from engineer to conductor in a snap. With 4 available configurations to choose from, including integrated cup and pick stick holders, Tully Models has a holder for you. Don't have a Proto Throttle? No problem. TullyModels.com has fascia holders for Digitrax and NCE throttles and holders for your smartphone too. Check out the entire lineup at TullyModels.com. ATLP Extra is our monthly newsletter delivered right to your inbox each month. Sign up for free at atlpextra.com.
ATLP Rewind.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott. So glad you could join us. It's time for Talking Ops with Don Irace, and we couldn't do that without the man himself, Don Irace. Don, welcome back.
Hey, Ray. Good to be back.
Well, it's a new adventure for us as we start these. We've been kind of talking them up as we've been going through your operations, but now we have arrived at the Talking Ops episodes, and boy, we've just been getting a lot of feedback and a lot of really positive stuff being said.
Yeah, we have. I've been getting a lot of messages on my Facebook page and personal messages on how people are enjoying the operations segment of everything that, it's really important to a lot of people. I mean, a lot of people have model railroads, and some people just enjoy trains going around in circles. And you got guys like us that, we want to put it to work and make it do something. So I think everybody's going to get a lot out of this show.
Absolutely. I think there's going to be a lot of relatability to a lot of folks, and we've got quite a few people that have already expressed interest in being on the show. And one of them is actually joining us tonight to talk about realistic operations. He's been on the podcast here recently, and it's glad to have him back. Dustin Whitten. Dustin, welcome.
Hey, Ray. Thanks for having me back.
Oh, great to have you here. And, again, it was really exciting. You sent Don and I an email and wanted to talk about realistic operations and how you apply your knowledge of the real railroad to your model railroad. And I think there's going to be a lot of really neat things to talk about here tonight.
I'm looking forward to it.
So, Dustin, let's talk about this a little bit in this concept. You sent us a PDF. I know you've done some clinics at RPMs regarding this. Why don't you kind of give us this synopsis of the concept that you have here?
The whole thing in a nutshell, Ray, is it's all about super detailing. If you're going to super detail your locomotives, if you're going to super detail your rolling stock, why not super detail your operations? I mean, like Don said, operations is the name of the game. If you're going to build the railroad, put it to work, see what it can do, invite your friends over and just, see what happens.
Absolutely. I'm full agreement to that. I've been doing it for years, and I go in my room and I'm by myself, and I'm not into it. I just can't seem to run a train around by myself. I got to have people around me and just having the fun. And that's what I enjoy. I'll just go sit at the desk and build something.
Exactly. And I will operate by myself. For years I said I was, a lone wolf. It's my railroad. I'm going to operate it, and, I'm going to have the fun. But while that's fun, to really see that layout, everything that you've built, everything that you've thought about, everything that you constructed, to see it come alive is, as a layout owner, there's not a better feeling in the world than just see see the smile on your operators' faces, getting their feedback, whether it's good, whether it's bad, whether it's indifferent, but just to see other people play out your vision of what you wanted to build, what you dreamed about. There's no better feeling as a layout owner than to see your layout come to life.
Right. Absolutely. I totally agree with that. I know I do. And I mean, when I used to have an op session every week, And then if something happened, I couldn't operate, then everybody be all upset because they couldn't come over. So they all want to come back, So you're doing something right.
As long as they're coming back, yeah, exactly. You're doing something right. Whether it's the food or whether it's the trains, just to get them back in the door. Hey, that's what it's all about.
Yeah, we certainly know layouts that are both good food and good trains,
we do.
And we're very fortunate to have them. So let's talk about this. And for most folks, when we develop our operating schemes, we try to maybe not so much know inside baseball stuff regarding the prototype. We kind of make a guess. I know for me, I spent a lot of time trackside, and just about the time I try to figure out what a railroad's doing, then I go, I have no clue what they're doing. So you've got some inside baseball information to share with us, being an engineer yourself. So let's talk about some of that prototype stuff that you've been able to pick up.
Well, one thing to play off of what you just said, things on the railroad change constantly. Right. What you did last month, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to do that next month. There's constant changes, constant rule changes, constant bulletins coming out in the terminal that I work out of. It seems like it's something every day that they're changing or tweaking or fine tuning, whether it's the company or whether it's the FRA, things are always changing. And, you look back at railroading just the past 5, 10, 15, 20 years, the industry has changed a lot just in a relatively short time span. And if you go back to, the glory days is what some people call it, the transition era, the 50s, the 60s, what they did then, the concept's still the same, moving freight, serving customers. But what they did back then versus what we do now is two totally different things.
That's for sure.
There's
no more climbing around on cars anymore.
Exactly. No more riding the tops of cars. And back then, the rule book was, only a few pages. And now you have books upon books upon books of the government's CFR, the Code of Federal Regulations, as well as, company issued rule books, timetables, hazmat, the list goes on.
And in 20 more years, it'll be even thicker.
Exactly. I hope I'm retired by then, but but yeah, you're right.
Yeah, it's a constant evolution in the railroad business. That's for sure. Even for us operators, layouts, we're always tweaking our operation.
Oh yeah,
you know what I mean. You have to. So after all the operating sessions I've done, I still find something that I got to change.
Yeah, and I'll comment on something that y'all talked about on your last episode, where I think Ray, you said you sit at the top of your steps and just stare at the layout. Don, I think you sit in your favorite chair and just stare at the layout.
Yeah,
and it couldn't have happened at the perfect time, because I was sitting in my chair just staring at the layout, listening to the podcast, and I was like, well, hell, I'm doing that right now. I'm just sitting here envisioning, imagineering, daydreaming about, the way this hill's going to look out, or the way this local's going to switch this tipple, or just playing it out in your mind. And you can get lost in time and just sit there for hours just staring. Hopefully nobody comes down and sees us just staring off into space. But, it's funny because you would be surprised how much you can accomplish just by thinking, just by visioning. And again, operations, if you can play it out in your mind, you can play it out on the layout.
Some of the best laid plans are from a chair.
Exactly.
Or a staircase.
And it's sometimes I had a few different parts of my layout where, like when I was building my paper mill, the way I was going to come into it wasn't going to work the way it was on the plan. So I had to pull the chair out, sit there and think about it. And after about 15, 20 minutes, I'm like, oh, wait a minute. I'll just come off the helix and come in the back way,
Yep.
Boom.
It's like a light bulb pops off. It's like, I know exactly what to do now.
Yep. And something, you're better off doing that, because if you just go ahead, just doing stuff, you end up just going back and doing it over again, because it's never right, So you're better off just kind of planning it out a little bit and then go from there. That's how I do it anyway.
Oh, yeah. And I think most of us can relate to that.
So let's start talking a little bit about what you've been able to come up with and what you shared with us as presentation of taking these prototype rules. So roll into that a little bit about finding this information about the prototype that gives you the basis of a rule book.
it's easy if you're modeling, a prototype railroad. Look at the timetables. You can gain a lot of information on your particular line segment just from a timetable. Railroad rule books, the list goes on. Hazmat, hazmat to most people is just boring, like Charlie Brown's teachers, going over in your head, just blah, blah, blah. But you can still glean a lot of information out of these rule books. And it's important to try to get location as close to your location as you can, even on Norfolk Southern. What I do in North Carolina is not going to be necessarily be the same thing they do in Tennessee or Georgia or Pennsylvania, because you have to look at the predecessor lines, because a lot of that, what the predecessor did, kind of funneled its way through into what modern Norfolk Southern does. So, if I'm trying to research and come up with an idea about a coal branch in West Virginia, I really don't want to look at rule books and timetables from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Yeah, they had coal trains. Yeah, they served some coal mines up around Shire Oaks and different parts of Pennsylvania. But that coal operation, being former Conrail, is not going to be the same type of coal operation as former N&W lines in Virginia, West Virginia, Kentucky. And so it's really important to try to get as close to your region as you can get. A lot of information's out there. A lot of information you have to dig down deep and find. I found a lot of good N&W timetables on, they come up all the time on eBay, Facebook Marketplace, and a lot of these Facebook groups, historical societies, just know where to get your information. That's step one.
That's good information.
It's always fun to find that inside baseball stuff too, especially historical, when you can go through it. And we recently had Matthew Fricks on. He was talking about car routing and this same kind of thing. It's like there's gold mine in all of that, really, that old information. And the more you dig, you can go right down a rabbit hole, but in a good way, and come out with just a ton of resources. I'm sure the old rule books and timetables are the same way.
Oh yeah. And like many aspects of the hobby, that's a hobby inside of a hobby, doing the research, doing the digging, trying to, find new things or find out information. Like you say, go down a rabbit hole. It's hard telling what you'll find.
Yeah, I did one better than that. I used to ride around with the crews during the day while they worked.
that is an excellent, and that's what I was going to touch on next. If you know a railroader, a retired railroader, hey, pick their brain. Yeah. I've befriended a lot of former N&W people, engineers, conductors, yardmasters, and hey, not all, but most railroaders will be more than happy to talk about the railroad all day long. Some of them are a little grumpy, and hey, I understand. I'm kind of slowly turning into that myself. But
don't go all the way. Don't go all the way.
But the vast majority, hey, if you approach them, say, hey, I'm just looking for a little bit of information, hey, they'll tell you everything you need to know.
Yeah, I mean, even though I'm down here now, I've reached out to a couple of guys that work for the P&W that still do. Yeah. One's retired, one still does, and I've asked him questions. Oh yeah, and he'll look it all up. He'll send me pictures and everything. He's a good guy.
That information is invaluable, because you get a picture from a particular industry or a rail yard, and you can walk around in that picture and you can get little details here, little details there, and just notice, well, hey, I didn't know there was an EOT rack beside that building. I got to model it. I got to put one there, and pictures and stories, are. My suggestion is, if you do sit down, have a chat, buy them a cup of coffee, record it. So, hey, if you don't mind, I want to record this. I want to pick your brain, and I want to get all the information I can get out of you, because a lot of those, old heads, unfortunately, are no longer with us. So it's important that if you're looking for a particular region or a particular time frame, hey, get that information, record it, document it, because it'll be worth its weight in gold.
It kind of adds the color to the whole picture, right?
Yeah.
We see it from the outside, right? We see, the locomotives, we see the cars, we see the yards, we see that, but we don't get that color, that inside real depth. And I think that's what that really adds when you're able to find somebody that's willing to have that kind of conversation with you.
Yeah, because when I rode, the section of PWI model, I rode with those guys on a few of those jobs, so I got to see firsthand how they handled everything, and I do model a few of the industries that I was with them with that they're actually switching out. So especially Univar Chemical Company. I mean, that was like the biggest thing they've ever had to do, because there was so much involved over there, and just watching them doing it. And I just applied that to my own layout,
Exactly. And I mean, and anybody can do that, anytime, is just watch a crew work. If you got, public access to a particular switching location, just go watch them. Take your camera, record it, and watch them work. And it's important, that you document that. How long does it take the conductor to get off the engine? How long does it take for him to secure the train with handbrakes and cut away from the train to go pull the empties or loads or whatever he's pulling? How long does it take him to line the switch? How long does it take him to line the derail? And, I know on Norfolk Southern and most railroads, if you're going into an industry, you can't couple to those cars until you can verify that it's safe to do so. Because, with box cars, you got to worry about dock plates, hoppers, and tanks. You got to worry about hose connections, and I see it time after time again. People on a layout, hey, they're itching to go switch industry. They pull up, they do the swap, and they're gone in like seconds. And I'm like, whoa.
That's not going to work.
But when you're gleaning information, take that time to just observe, make a few notes. And again, what you see, it's no different me working on the railroad versus Bob watching people work on the railroad. Take notes and replicate what you see. And whether it's HO, N scale, O scale, just replicate what you see.
So that's what it did. Like I said, again, with Univar, they would pull up with the cars they were going to be switching, and they would just stop, and the conductor get off the train. He'd have to go inside the building, and then he'd have to talk to the yard guy, the guy that controls the tank yard, and that guy would come out. He would hand them their own switch list, not even their switch list. They get their own, what they want. He opens up the gates. He lowers down the blue flags, make sure the hoses are all disconnected from the cars before they start pulling cars out of there. And they do this every time they go there, safety first.
And at multiple industries throughout the day. I mean, that's just one location.
Right, exactly.
Think if that job's working 5, 6, 7 industries in a 12-hour day, that's a lot of time just sitting.
Yep.
Just sitting. And I tell operators all the time, it's like, this is not a racetrack. It's not who gets back to the yard first wins. Take your time. I know people don't want to just stand around and put their hands in their pockets and do nothing. I mean, the object is to run trains, but slow the roll, slow the pace, and actually try to simulate that little bit of dead time. Hey, take a sip of water, write out a switch list, whatever you need to do, get your tools in order before you go, uncoupling from the train and going up to work the industry.
That word that you just used is key: simulation. It's not just a game, or like you said, it's not a race. It's not anything. It's simulating it. And that more you make those observations, like you talked about, the better you can create your simulation.
Yeah.
Right? You want to be able to add that. And I think the smaller the layout, the more important that comes. Not to say that bigger layouts can't apply these rules, but when you start to get a little bit smaller and you want to make a session last, I know that if I show up at a layout at 7:00 at night, I don't want to go home at 7:30.
Exactly.
Right? I want to make this thing last, right? We want to spend some time together.
Yeah.
And sure, I could probably, just crank everything up and slam a whole bunch of cars and get it done. That it's not the destination, it's the journey. And I think a lot of what you're talking about there helps better that simulation and slow it down.
And I've said for the longest time, I think I said it on my podcast, when you spend more time in a scene, you get more from that scene. You get that ambiance. You get that overall feeling that the layout owner is trying to create. You get more of that the more time you divulge yourself into that scene, whether it's a coal tipple, a freight yard, a mainline passenger train. You get more the longer you stay doing what you're doing.
Yeah, I've had some guys that used to work for the PNW operating my old layout when I was in Rhode Island, and one of the guys there worked a local job that I was modeling. He says, "I feel like I'm at work."
And that's probably the best compliment you could ever get, right there.
Yeah, it was good. Well, we also do things to slow things down too. Like I mean, like on some of my industries, you have to open the gates, you have to take the derails up, you got to put the blue flags down. All that stuff kind of slows everything down. Plus, my locomotives don't go any more than 15 scale miles an hour, so that slows everything down too.
I got mine capped at 25, and it's funny because people don't understand how slow 15 or 25 really is in HO scale. You can compress a lot, and speed is probably the biggest one because, like you say, the more time you can spend doing what you're doing, the more you're going to get out of it.
Yep.
So let's talk about that. Let's dive a little bit into speed, because I think it's a little bit more than just that. We talk about speed over compression, and the ratios that seem to work in that. And you talk about the real railroad and what 40 miles an hour looks like on the rail, and what 40 miles an hour looks like in compression looks like a racetrack.
Yep.
Yeah.
So again, making those decisions. Talk a little bit about speed and what you found there, Dustin.
Well, I'm a big proponent. Slower the better. The slower the better. Just because I think it looks better. If you want to take trackside pictures, if you're running slower, it's a lot easier to take decent trackside pictures. Where if you're hauling tail across the layout, if you want to take a picture, well, what you got to do? You got to stop.
Right.
Yep.
And so just slow down. And I'll say again. Greg McComas with his situation cards, get them, download them, check them out. Because I'm going to tell you, I run the main line for 20 years of my career. Everything from coal trains to grain trains, mixed freight to hot intermodal trains. You are not going to go from point A to point B wide open all the time, no slowdowns, no nothing. It's just not going to happen. If you're on a territory that you can, I'm kind of jealous because I've never been able to do that.
Yeah.
But,
right.
You gotta think, and again, this is all stuff that you can replicate or simulate on a layout. Grades, it's really easy to maintain speed on a grade in HO scale. You cannot maintain speed on a grade on the 1-to-1. It does not work. I can come through the bottom running dead on 60 in an intermodal train. By the time you get to the top of the hill, you're not going to be running 60. You may be running. If you got a good running train, you may be running 45, but you're not going to top the hills at the same speed that you're coming through the bottoms. Track conditions, slow orders, replicate them, because there is not a day that goes by that you're not going to have some sort of slow order on the main line. Typically, my district runs from Linwood, North Carolina to Lynchburg, Virginia, and we got a line that goes over to Roanoke. The slow orders, that's 156 miles. On any given day, you're probably going to have 1, 2, 3, 4 slow orders. On a rare day, maybe a weekend when no one wants to work, you may have, no slow orders. Another thing that you can simulate is crossing issues. If you have, if someone calls in and reports a false or partial activation on a grade crossing, you have to run 15 mile an hour over that crossing, at least to head in over 15 mile an hour. If you have activation failure, you got to stop and flag it. And again, that stuff, and the situation cards that Greg has, with HOT, EOT failures. If your EOT goes out, you're restricted to 30 until either the communication comes back or you change it out and get a new one.
Right. I have those. I do use those cards.
Yeah. And I mean, they're free. Download them and put them into play because they're accurate. And it's real world things that we do every single day, and something that's just super simple to replicate on a layout.
I mean, the other thing I have on mine is I have a defect detector.
Well, I love a defect detector.
Right. So with the defect detector, when you're climbing a grade, when it's basically on the helix is where it is, because that was about the best place I could put it. So if they get hit with a hot box or a dragging equipment, they have to stop the train, call the dispatcher, and they have to sit there. So I have a fast clock up there, and they have to sit there for like 10 minutes on the fast clock. And then once that 10 minutes simulates them conducting getting off the train, walking the train, changing a hose, whatever he's going to do.
I'm going to tell you,
after 10 minutes,
and if you got hit with a hot box, you could be there anywhere from 30 minutes to 3 hours, depending on what it is, how far back it is, and especially modern day trains that are the new PSR stuff, where bigger, longer, heavier trains. If you got to walk 12,000 foot of train, you're going to be gone a long time. Because, I mean, you got to figure that's 3 miles down, 3 miles back, you know.
Let's put dirt bikes on them trains for you guys, all right?
Or a Segway or e-bike or something on the front. Yeah.
That's crazy.
But, you know,
that's crazy.
And again, we're not walking on a sidewalk here. You know, you're walking beside a main line on ballast, and the ballast is you know, slope like that. So not exactly the best walking conditions. So, and then, you know, like we got a line that goes from Alta Vista to Roanoke, the old Virginian V line, and you know, wildlife out there is nuts, you know. And I as a conductor, I would never walk a train on the V line. I said, not going to happen, you know, not unless I absolutely had to. But like I say, you know, hey, you know, Mountainous Railroad, if you get hit with a hot box, guess what? You're going to have the main line tied up for a long time.
Right. You want to go back to the days where you walked the roofs of the truck.
Exactly, yeah.
For that.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
That's for sure. As I'm looking through the rest of your presentation, you talked about some other things that slow things down and speed restrictions. And I guess it didn't really dawn on me, you know, types of cars and their speed restrictions. And you talk a little bit about that in your presentation too.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people, you know, there are reasons why a freight train looks like, you know, the way it does. You know, you have a lot of equipment restrictions. You have a lot of placement restrictions on cars, especially when it comes to hazmat. I put in the clinic, you know, 40 to 70, when it comes to auto racks, 40 to 70 in a solid block on the rear of the train, you can move unrestricted. But if you have 40 or more auto racks that are not on the rear of the train, you're restricted to 25.
Wow.
Why? I don't know. I have no idea. I guess it has to do, especially when they're empty, light car placement. On the rear of the train, you don't have as much buff and draft forces. You don't have the chance of them wanting to string line in a curve with a lot of weight behind it. So I figured that's what it was. A lot of these rules, we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of rules. We don't know why, but we just do it because that's what they.
Because the rule book says so. That's why. Yeah.
That's exactly
right.
Don't ask why.
I got something. What is the rule for having empty center beam cars in the middle of a 10,000 foot train?
That rule has changed when it comes to that's on NS is what we refer to as light long cars. Basically, you know, empty. Basically, I think it's anything over 60 foot that's empty. You have a lot of placement restrictions on that now because of all the bad PR the NS was getting and all the derailments that we were having.
And Horseshoe Curve, especially 2 derailments like in a week and a half. If you go to Horseshoe Curve, you see a bunch of center beam cars laying on their side on the rail.
And so now, you know, you can't have them. I think it all is based on tonnage of the train. Like if the whole train is under 6,000 tons, you can have them anywhere. There's no placement restrictions. But if you get over 6,000 tons, you can't have any empty light long cars on the head end, like the head 10 cars. They have to be moved back. Right. And then it changes again if you have distributed power. And, you know, you can't have, you know, distributed power. You can't have them within 10 cars either side of the DP motors. The list continues. And I'm sure next week it will change again. Again, if you're not modeling the modern era, don't worry about it. Put them anywhere, you know?
Yeah.
So in the prototype world, I'm just trying to imagine what does this look like in a yard? I mean, there's got to be, I mean, when is the crew responsible? Is a yard responsible? Do they tell you that all these rules have been followed? Do you have to check on that?
Typically that falls on the yard master. It is the yard crew's responsibility when it comes to breaking down and making up these trains. And, you know, I'm on a yard job in Linwood now. And when it comes to pull these tracks and shove them off in the forwarding yard, you know, you may have to come out with only half the track and set it over and then come back and get the rest of it. Or, you know, you may have to set this block over first. I know we build a southbound freight out of Linwood, 153 runs to Birmingham. And that train is plagued almost daily with having to reblock and reorganize the Birmingham block and the Doraville block. And that's an everyday thing. Well, okay, we can only take a quarter of this track and set it over. Then we got to come back and get the back half of this track and set it over. And then we can get the middle of it and set it over. And so it's like a chess match where, you're breaking these tracks down bit by bit to shove them off and build a train. Every once in a while, the dominoes will fall right, and you'll just pull it and set it over. But it's rare.
Yeah, that's the day you go buy a lottery ticket after work, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
But I'm now thinking about applying that to a model railroad that has a larger yard. Boy, you could start to apply quite a bit of at least that concept of some similar cars or whatever. These rules that they can't be near each other or blocked away from each other seems to be something that would enhance a yard operation.
Well, it's like the light long car placement. On the prototype, it can't be within 10 cars of the head end. Well, replicating that in HO scale, say, all right, well, instead of 10, it's 2. You can't have that empty center beam, within the first 2 or 3 spots. Move it back in the train. Mm-hmm. Stuff like that is very easily replicated in any scale. Like the hazmat. If you have a loaded hazmat dangerous car on the prototype, you can't be within the head 6 cars. It has to be at least 6 deep on the prototype. If you're not running big trains on the layout, say, okay, that loaded tank can't be within 3 cars of the head end,
Right.
And it, like I say, just, breaking down what and just simplifying it for your layout.
Yeah. For guys that do DPUs and the models, the trouble with DPUs in the model railroad part is you have to speed match those locomotives, because if the DPUs are pushing harder than the front end, you're going to push everything right off the track. But in the real world, you don't have to speed match locomotives.
Right.
I mean, just the weight alone of everything keeps everything on the rail,
Exactly.
But it's that's a tough thing. You just can't replicate DPUs if you're doing like Mark Herrick does on his BNSF layout. Those engines are going to be speed matched to run almost perfectly in order to push a 20, 30 car train along his layout.
Because if it runs too fast, you're going to have problems. And if it runs too slow, you're going to have problems.
Too slow, you're going to have problems.
You're going to break couplers apart, or you're going to dump the cars all over the floor. So, yeah. Here's one I didn't know when I was looking at this. You put up on speed restrictions of locomotives, and I had no idea if you were running engine light or 2 or more locomotives, you could only do 50 miles an hour. I didn't realize there'd be a speed restriction.
That's because for a single light locomotive is you don't have enough to actively shunt the rails for the crossing gates. It will not pick up because it's so short. It won't hit the circuits right. And a single locomotive by itself is not very stable. I mean, I think you wouldn't want to run track speed on a single locomotive. Not
really.
Yet.
Okay.
That they do, especially the GEs. And I'm a big GE fan, but
me too.
I will say GE, when they start getting some age on them, they want to shimmy and shake awful lot. A lot of lateral play in the trucks, and it's not. Wow. I don't think it's not necessarily the truck itself or the wheel sets. I think it's the body mounts between the truck and the rest of the locomotive they're wore out.
The other thing I noticed between the GEs and the EMDs, that when we've got a GE coupled to an EMD, when you throttle them up, they react a lot different. The two of them, one will slam right into the other one.
GEs are notorious for loading slow. The older EMDs loaded a lot faster. Really, when it comes to the new, ACEs, the 70 ACEs and all that, really they're about the same as the GE. They all load slow. But my favorite, and again, I'm a GE guy, but my favorite locomotive ever was the straight Spartan cab SD70s that NS had, the ones that, the 2500s. Because even though they had the screens and they were starting to dabble with the electronics a little bit, they still loaded quick and they still had a 26L brake. And I love a 26L brake over this modern electric crap any day of the week, because you can actually, feather the independent brake. It's because like on the electrics, it's either that brake's on or off.
It's like a trailer brake.
Yeah, exactly. You really can't feather and play with the electric brakes like you could the 26Ls. But yeah, EMDs are notorious for loading a lot faster and a lot harder than the GEs But like I say, this modern day stuff, it all sucks. That's why I'm in the yard. I ain't got to worry about it anymore. I ain't got to worry about trip optimizer, leader, or PTC. I don't have to worry about none of that. I just go forwards and backwards.
No, and just worry about some of these other rules of building these trains and make sure that they go out the right way.
And that all falls on the yard master, so that don't fall on me.
There you go.
I just put it where the boss tells me to put it.
How about the restrictions on the hazmat cars behind a locomotive? There has to be a buffer car or a spacer car between the locomotive the guys are in, a buffer, and then the first hazmat car?
On a loaded hazmat, it has to be at least 6 deep.
Oh, really?
From an occupied locomotive or caboose. If it's empty, it only has to have one spacer between occupied locomotive or caboose.
So I learned something.
In DPU operations, there's no restrictions. That was a big thing a couple years ago when it comes to DP locomotives. Can it run beside it? Can it not run beside it? And the FRA finally ruled that because that locomotive is not occupied and is locked up, it can run, a hazmat car can run beside it.
See, I always thought it was the hazmat car had to be away from the locomotive because it was a potential ignition source. I guess that was in my mind, right? And not necessarily that the crew would get gassed or whatever else, a chemical exposure.
And that's exactly right. And to add to that, and it used to be a rule, it still may, I don't know. Shows you how much I read my hazmat rules. A loaded hazmat can't be beside a reefer because, like you just said, it's the ignition source with that motor that's powering the reefer car. And again, I'd have to check on that, but I don't get a lot of reefers around my area, so I really don't know.
So when I operate, when we do, like, especially when we switch that chemical company, there's 2 locomotives on that job. So what we do is they go in and they switch out the cement company first. So they always have that cement car behind the locomotive, and then they can start attaching tank cars to that. So they can't switch the tank cars out unless that hopper car's on the front.
Now, when it comes to locals, when I said about the 6 deep, that's road trains and through trains. When it comes to locals, basically the rule of thumb is you want that loaded hazmat as far away from the motor as you can. They just don't want it up against the motor.
Right.
I mean, because if you're running a local and say you got to work 2 industries, a box car place and a tank car place, and you go out there with one box car or 2 box cars and 6 tanks, well, the 6 deep rule doesn't apply.
Right.
So basically, what they're telling you is, hey, we understand the rule doesn't apply, but you make sure them 2 box cars are ahead of them tank cars, whatever you leave.
Right. So, like on mine, you got an occupied locomotive on the front, then you got an unoccupied locomotive behind it, and then a hopper car behind it. Then they start switching then they start pulling tank cars out. Yep. That's how I do it. Well, that's the way they're supposed to do it.
Now, where it gets weird, and I'm sure somebody is listening probably knows the answer to this. I do not, and I'm sorry to say. But when it comes to unit hazmat trains, like ethanol trains, crude oil trains, with the one buffer car, I have no idea where the hell that came from. Like, what's that one car going to do when you got 100 loaded ethanol tanks behind it? Yeah. And I remember it was, I can't remember the name of the industry now. It's out right just east of Raleigh in North Carolina. We had a brand new ethanol place come online, and we were bringing unit trains of ethanol out of Roanoke. And no one knew how to run them. I remember bringing these unit ethanol trains with like 6 cars of crap on the head end just to make sure the ethanol was 6 deep. And then that lasted like maybe once or twice. And they're like, no, we're just going to do, we're going to put this empty gondola on the head end and send you down the road. And they're like, no, that ain't going to work either, because now they come up with this where, well, the buffer car has to be a certain weight and a certain length to match the tank cars, and I don't know. I don't know where that came from.
But applying that to the model railroad, that's certainly something, like Don was talking about with his operation, and certainly with others, of making sure that you leave that buffer car on, and then having to make sure on both ends, have a buffer for through unit trains and those kinds of things as well. So lot to be applied there.
So the rear buffer car on the end of the train, is that only there so they don't have to move the front buffer car to the back?
It's just convenience. Yep. Because, most of our ethanol that goes down east, a lot of it comes off the Iowa interstate and then gets routed to NS via Chicago. And then it comes down into Roanoke and, on down in North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
That train may change directions several times in its journey to get where it's going. So if you got to run around the train, we got to run around them in Greensboro to even take them east. It's really easy to have a buffer car on each end. You just run the motors around it, rehang the light, and get out of town.
Right. I figured that's what that was all about anyway. Because I could never figure why would you put a buffer car on the end of a train? You know what I mean? So the only makes sense is so they don't have to move the buffer cars around. There's one on either end, so they can pull it either way they want.
Or if it stalls going up a hill, if you don't have that buffer car, a crew can't push it. So again, if you stall, you have to have pusher service. You got that buffer car on the rear to protect against the pushers.
So many rules.
And it's getting worse. But, it's like the old heads always say, there's rules in that rule book that were written in blood, and we know that. We know those rules, but then you got a whole lot of rules in that book that you're just left scratching your head going, why?
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense. Why? But because it's written in black and white, guess what? You got to do it or pay the price.
Well,
that's
all. That comes from the safety people. That's what it's all about. The safety people write the rules. So if they see something that you don't see, they deem unsafe. They're going to make a rule.
Oh yeah,
simple as that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep. And if they see you doing it any other way, you're automatically wrong. It doesn't matter what you're doing. You're wrong.
So a lot of amazing stuff that you just in this 45 minutes that we've been talking already, a lot of amazing rules that I didn't even know existed on the railroad. And we talked a little bit about applying them, but let's talk a little bit more about conveying them as you start to set up operations with a little bit more rules in them. And why don't you talk a bit about that, Dustin, and how you've applied that to your railroad?
Basically, I have a clearance card with, if you come and operate on my layout, I'm going to give you a clearance card typed up in N&W font, and it looks just like a clearance card like you would sign for, back in the day. But that clearance card is going to give you some helpful tips and tricks of how I would run that train. Not necessarily rules. I ain't going to call them rules. The only rule here is to have fun. Designing a simple timetable for your layout, whether it's a freelance, whether it's you're modeling a prototype, just a little bit of paperwork goes a long way. Yeah, I do mine with a little clearance card. Every operator gets one and it's tied specific to the train that operator is going to run. And like I say, a few helpful tips, tricks, and a couple things to look out for. And it's just enough to basically not get the operator in trouble or, have him switch himself into a corner. But, basically have it, I ain't going to say really dumb it down, but basically just put enough information out there where you don't seem like you're being too demanding from your operators. And again, a little information goes a long way. And I've seen people make pamphlets with just a few guidelines to go by, little timetables, little straight line diagrams, and just hand it to your operator. Say, here it is. If you have any questions, ask me, or ask Bob or Joe or whoever's running. Ask them. Because 9 out of 10 times your operators on your layout are going to be familiar with your layout. I've run with the same group of guys for 15 years, as I'm sure both of y'all have. And it's really easy that if you do have a new guy come along, an hour in the train room, that guy's going to be a seasoned veteran too, just by the sheer camaraderie of the other operators. I welcome anybody. If anybody wants to run the South Branch, come on. Don, if you're ever in North Carolina, stop in. We'll haul some coal.
I'm closer to Ray is.
A little bit. I don't know. I could get there pretty quick too. One of the things, and I'll ask Don this as well, creating rules and having this stuff also requires, I think, when you and I talked the last time, we used the word balancing act a little bit when we were talking, and the rules to having operators, it's kind of a balancing act of having rules that you want to have followed that are going to enhance the ops, but balance them so it doesn't become a nuisance to an operator, but you also need to get their buy-in too, right?
Yeah, I mean, you gotta kind of. Some guys handle rules good, and some guys don't handle rules good. And you
Exactly.
can see that. And after about 4 or 5 times, you can see who they are. I'm lucky. My guys all handle whatever rules that I give them. I've explained everything to them, and they pretty much take that. And then, like, if I'm busy, because I operate too, I'm not one of these guys that walk around scuffing my feet saying, "What are you doing it like that for? What are you doing it like that for?" I built this railroad for me to have fun, not just for you guys to have fun. So they can, like, if I got a bunch of guys I've had here for like 3 years. So if I got a new guy and he's working on the other side of me, I'll say, "Look, if you have any questions, ask him. He'll be more than glad to help you." So basically, I got human rule books walking around. A lot of guys don't like carrying paper around. They don't like it. But we have very few rules that really we use. I don't like I said, I don't tell people how to do their job because all crews switch differently. Nobody does it the same way. I will give you a hint, like in my paper mill. I tell a new guy, I said, "Look, if you want to, don't go and get in trouble. Switch the box cars and the slurry cars first." I said, "Just listen to me. That's all I'm going to tell you. You get that done, the rest of it's just going to fall into place for you, But then you got guys that you tell that, well, they got to do their own thing. Next thing I know, the engine's on the wrong side of the cars. They're scratching their head. They're talking to themselves. Oh, how did I do this? Well, I told you to switch the box cars and the slurry cars first. So I said, I told you, you're going to get yourself in trouble if you don't do that.
Well, I think there's value in entertainment in watching that, isn't there?
that there is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say on this layout here, on past layouts, I have designed some pretty complex switching puzzles where, just like your paper mill, if you weren't really, really careful with what you did when, you'd switch yourself in the corner. You couldn't get out of it. This layout here, I like. It's easy peasy. I mean, anybody, I got one job that's a little complicated that if you don't do it just right, it'll make you stumble, but you're not going to switch yourself in a corner. And so I would like to say, on this layout, I got something for everybody. I got a little something to make you think, but for the most part, we're switching coal hoppers. It's not rocket science. It's pretty easy. And that's one thing too, is like, by doing my little clearance cards, and it's got, tonnage limit, locomotive numbers on it, and it says N&W, got the N&W letterhead on it, and just a few, like I say, tips and techniques and things that I would suggest, not rules, but if you want to work this job, this is kind of the flow. We'll say it like that. This is the flow that this job should have from point A to point B, and you really can't mess that up. I mean, it's written there in black and white. You're not going to lose it in translation. It's not. I think he said this. No, it's right there on the card.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, right. I mean, look at the paper.
And because I've been the new operator on brand new layouts. I didn't know north to south to east to west. I didn't even know what train symbol I had. I was just going that way,
right.
And it's really easy as a new operator to get lost on a layout. And I like to consider myself a fairly seasoned operator, and I'm just kind of looking around the aisles, going, "Where am I? Who do I talk to?" And because the layout owner didn't have signage on the layout, or didn't have a timetable or something, some sort of visual guide to tell me, "Hey, go here and talk to the dispatcher at this location, not this location." And again, not rules, just tips and techniques or some signage. You ain't even got to write nothing down. Just put some signage on the fascia. Me personally, I like a clean, neat fascia. I don't want a whole bunch of doodads and stuff hanging off my fascia, but just a little bit of operating cues, I guess you could say,
right,
for that new operator. Where your veteran guys are going to look at it and think nothing about it, but that new guy would be like, "Hey, I remember seeing this. I know I got to stop here or do this or do that and talk to this person or that person." That really, I think, number one, it helps people, but number two, it kind of just narrows in that field that flavor, that ambiance that you're trying to portray. And it just helps you get your point over that much better.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm with you too. I don't like a messy fascia. I like my fascia to be clean. Ray has made up all the labeling and all the stuff of my fascia to tell the guys where they are, so they know what town they're in. They know what CP they're at. I mean, even the yards, there's a big graphic on the yards that tells you what the track numbers are, what the macro numbers are for the yard tracks. So, and it's nice and clean and neat, you know.
And that information is gold.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
because, you know, especially because on the prototype, just like on our model railroads, every single track should have a name or a code. You know, I think what Santa Fe called them click numbers, or, you know, NS has got, you know, the terminal zone numbers or whatever. Every track on your layout should have a name or should have some sort of designation for that track. It's prototypical for one, but number two, it helps your operators.
Yep.
You know, and anything you can do to help your operators is going to be beneficial to the layout owner.
Right. I mean, on my layout again, starting at the backdrop, track 1, 2. If it's 2 engine house tracks, it's engine house track 1, 2. Then the yard is 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So everything starts at 1 at the wall and works forward the higher numbers, and that's everywhere on the layout. Every switch and everything is the same way. So it's if you do it here, you do it there, you know. So and it makes it easy for them to remember that, you know.
And especially if, like, I've, you know, if on multiple deck layouts where left is always east and right is always west, you know, I don't like changing directions level to level, you know. That just adds confusion. But like you say, if you have a system, you know, from the backdrop forward, this is how it's laid out, and you carry that theme across the layout, you're golden.
Labeled control points is also another thing that's also helpful, that, you know, so some person knows where they are, especially at somewhere where they're going to have to contact the dispatcher to be able to say, I know I'm at this point. I'm at Lennox. I'm at CP 29.72. You know, being able to, you know, have that label there, whether you have it on the signal itself or if you put it on the fascia, is also a huge help in operating.
It's better off on the fascia because most of the guys can't see anymore. So I put a number on the
Yeah, guys that are operating with you down in Florida probably have that problem a little more. Yeah.
Where am I? I can't see.
That's for sure.
I live in the land of the blind.
Let me ask both of you this question. I'll start with Dustin, and I'll ask you both the same question. As layout owners, what is your biggest pet peeve of a rule that your guys seem to break? What would be your biggest pet peeve to that?
Go ahead.
I'm gonna say this, and I'm probably the most guilty of it as anybody, is not paying attention to your switches and running through switches. I mean, I got my layout broken into power district. So if you run through a switch and short the layout out, it's not going to short the whole layout out.
Yeah.
But it's, you know, nothing's more frustrating. You know, you're in the zone, you're switching or you're running, and someone runs through a switch and shorts the layout, and everything shuts down. You're just like, oh. And then, you know, if you got 10 guys in the training room, all 10 of them are going to start looking. It's like, was that me? What did I do?
Well, isn't it funny, Don? I've been to operating sessions with you, and then that happens, and it just seems like a cry from everybody. Wasn't me. Everybody's wasn't me.
Wasn't me.
Yeah.
Everybody put your hands up. I didn't do it.
Nobody ever says, "Oh, it's my fault. It's my fault."
Yeah,
Nobody
no one ever confesses to it.
Your train's all over the place, but it's not your fault. But yeah, that's the same thing with me. And I tell the guys too. I says the most important thing to do is pay attention to the switch in front of you.
Yep.
Just make sure the switch is lined up. But I mean, lately, most of my turnouts on the main line are controlled by a dispatcher because it's just, and I don't have any problem. But once they get off the main, then especially in a paper mill, I mean, all of a sudden I hear the DCC squeal noises. I'm like, you know, buddy, those Dakotas are expensive.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
You know, if it's going to squeal, at least take the locomotive off so it doesn't build the Dakota up. You know what I mean? But I got circuit breakers anyway. But it's mostly in the paper mill area because that's where all the manual switches are. All the other switches are all controlled by a dispatcher.
And I'm not going to knock it because, I mean, we're all guilty of it. We've all done
I've done it.
So all the thing you got to do is just laugh and say, I should know better.
Right.
I laugh a lot.
Oh yeah.
And while I think both of you had a great pet peeve with there, for mine, it's speed and the misuse of speed and watching that. And even when you're operating with somebody and you watch them, take that potentiometer and they spin it like it's the wheel on Wheel of Fortune, right? And the speed doesn't translate well over compression. We talked about that earlier. And slowing things down, enjoy it. Don't make it look like it's a racetrack. Don't make it look like it's a Lionel train set. Slow the thing down. Enjoy the time that you have at the layout. And again, it's not about the destination. It's about the journey to that and being able to run trains.
Just one thing I want to bring up, especially if you run the ESU decoders, there's a little checkbox in there. It's called start delay. Don't check, just uncheck that box. You don't want the start delay, because what happens is most operators, when they crack the throttle, if that engine don't move right away, they just keep cracking. And then all of a sudden it takes off.
Takes off like a fighter jet. Yeah.
Right. So I took the start delay off everything, and now they turn it and the engine starts moving, and they got better control. I just wanted to make a point of that.
I think you've come up with a lot of really neat things for us to consider, Dustin, as you went through this and taking prototype rules and doing that research, and then taking that and finding ways to apply it. And like you mentioned, applying it in compression. It may not be 6 buffer cars or a block of 6 or 8, but if you can narrow that down to 2, and it makes your yard operations a little more interesting, or you're local, and then you got to make sure you have the buffer in place and behind a hazmat car, or those kinds of things definitely help enhance operations.
I mean, and it's easy. Like I say, it's a hobby within a hobby. Do the research. See what you can uncover about your prototype, your location, your era. And if you're freelancing, you have a lot of free range there. That, hey, if you're kind of partial to the Santa Fe, well, look to see what the Santa Fe did. If you're modeling, in Texas, pretty good shot that the Santa Fe did something in Texas that you'll like. So, just take cues from what you see and what you know and what you learn and what you hear. And pretty much 99% of it you can replicate in HO scale or any scale.
Right. Absolutely.
All right. Well, Dustin, it was great talking with you here on Around the Layout podcast and learning a bit more about applying realistic operations to your layout. Thanks for coming on and sharing with us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's episode, check out past shows, and much more on our website, aroundthelayout.com. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at aroundthelayout.com/crew. Follow us on social media, aroundthelayout.com/social. And send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.
Look at the paper.